Presiding Officer, we've heard today from Sarah Boyack of the real terms 22% cut to the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service budget over the last 10 years. We've also heard how 15% of the workforce has been lost and another 780 jobs are currently at risk. In the face of our climate emergency, this is not sustainable. In just the first 2 days of Storm Babette, the service received more than 750 emergency calls and attended almost 300 incidents, including rescuing people from homes and vehicles. Our fire and rescue workers put themselves on the front line for us every day, yet they're having to fight for the fundamental resources they need to do their jobs. The Scottish Government may argue that the reduction in rescue workers shouldn't concern us, that the Government is reducing the risk to life from flooding in other ways, and even that these jobs are no longer necessary, but all the evidence suggests otherwise. Presiding Officer, as the Minister acknowledged in her statement last Wednesday, and as has been emphasised again today, our changing climate is bringing more extreme weather events with increasing risks of flooding. In 2015, SEPA described the event of 100 homes being flooded in the Brechin area as a 1 in 200 chance. But it happened just 8 years later. And in 2021, SEPA estimated that hundreds of homes and businesses in Brechin would be evacuated by floods in the 2080s due to climate change. But just 2 years later, hundreds of my constituents have had to be evacuated. Climate change is affecting our environment vastly more rapidly than we have been prepared for. And while we hear time and time again about the steps being taken to protect communities, clearly they're not enough. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government might argue that it aims to tackle the risk of flooding at source by tackling climate change. We heard from Rona Mackay how we're in the eye of the storm of climate change. We know that climate change is global and that the effects are likely to cascade, triggering more and more extreme events like Storm Babette at home and across the world. But dramatic action and leadership still has the potential to make a huge difference. So we cannot afford to keep missing our emissions targets. Yes, we're over halfway to net zero, but our emissions reductions have been slower than planned, despite the significant drop in travel during the pandemic. That means Scotland is continuing to contribute to climate disasters, both at home and globally, with little sign of them reducing any time soon. The decisions we make here impact people everywhere because our climate is connected. We must act now to risk endangering more lives. The good news is, Presiding Officer, we're not powerless to save our climate, and there are lessons from nature that we can learn. We heard from Maggie Chapman about natural flood management solutions. These can be hugely effective and offer a way to increase resilience while also meeting biodiversity, carbon capture and other environmental goals. Willie Rennie spoke about the benefits of riparian woodlands, which can slow river flows, cool water temperatures, improve water quality and increase biodiversity. And our abundant peatlands can act as a natural sponge to prevent rainfall in higher areas overflowing rivers downstream. That's why it's so concerning that the Scottish Government has missed its woodland creation targets for the last 5 years, and that 80% of our peatland is in a degraded state, and that the Scottish Government has missed its target for peatland restoration for 5 years in a row. Presiding Officer, today we've heard how targets to reduce climate change are not being met, how targets to create woodland are not being met, how targets to restore peatland are not being met. We've heard how the Government has failed to report on flood risk management plans, how it's failed to adequately fund our fire and rescue service, and how this has all failed communities like Brechin. So we know the problems we're facing from climate change. They're well documented. And we know the solutions needed for climate adaptation. They're within reach. What we're lacking is a government willing and able to rise to that challenge.